through a thoughtful consideration of the uniqueness and the validity of every person's experience of self, we can develop greater acceptance for all. Today is a new day. I am Nikki G, your host. Welcome to the Lone Doctrine, a safe space to bridge the gap between your authentic self and your mental health. We are your food for thought exploration station in order to make today better than yesterday. This month, we are talking about identity. Now, if you haven't tuned in to the past few weeks, I suggest doing so. Well, the past couple weeks. Every month, we choose a topic. And as you go back throughout the months, you'll notice that we've transitioned a little bit. And if you're with us here today, we are grateful for you. We think you're awesome, and we think your story is so important. And what's even more important is finding our true self. So that's kind of what we're exploring this month. Finding out what our identity is and that real sense of identity, like the for real. Because sometimes the world sets expectations on us, and sometimes we set these crazy expectations on ourselves. And it's time to kind of put that all aside for a moment and start with a blank slate and figure out who we are. A lot of people, no matter how you identify, struggle with identity, especially people in the LGBT community. Not just finding out where you fall on that spectrum, LGBT+, but also where you fall inside of that. So today we're going to explore lots of different ways we can start to define all those little pieces of identity and where you might resonate the most and how you can create your colorful collection of who you are. Now, this can go way back. This can go back into our childhood where sometimes we have the impression put on our kids where there's boy toys and girl toys, boy clothes and girl clothes. Everything is separated right from the start. Now, it's a lot better than, say, in my day than it was in the days before that, but we still have a lot of work to go. For example, when I was young, because I didn't fit exactly right into the feminine or the female definition, I was often called a tomboy. And when I was young, it wasn't so much of a big deal. Sure, I like to play with Barbies, and I like to play with G.I. Joe, and I like to get dirty in the mud, and sometimes I like to play dress up. I was so all over the map that it wasn't until I got older and I started to realize or unrealize that maybe my genuine ways weren't the ways they were supposed to be. That right there is the worst kind of pressure and weight we can put on a child. Because that right there could have been the start for me personally, where everything went into chaos and I started to lose who I was. Because it was then that people were telling me, I can't do this, I shouldn't do that, I shouldn't wear this, I shouldn't put on this, I shouldn't play with that, I shouldn't play with those people, I shouldn't play that sport, I shouldn't play that instrument. Now, I am a professional composer. My main instrument is drums. That in itself is a male-dominated instrument. Not only am I in a male-dominated field, but I'm also playing a male-dominated instrument. And I have stories upon stories upon stories on how difficult that path has been being a female drummer. But that's besides the point. I have a personal experience with this conflict of identity throughout my entire life, starting from my childhood. So if you take a second and you kind of walk down memory lane, was there any moments or times where you felt out of place because of someone else's judgment? Because someone else was telling you you shouldn't? That's when things get hard. Because that leads to self-doubt, less self-worth, confusion, and a sense of just feeling like we don't belong. And again, it doesn't matter how you identify. Ironically, although the LGBT plus community feels this a lot more than most, or even communities who are oppressed feel this a lot, it doesn't matter. Everybody experiences this in some way. And if you look at life, it's very interesting because we go from this genuine state to like all this confusion throughout our middle life. And then as we get older, we work back to where we were, working back to that authentic space of not caring what other people think, doing the things we love, and making the best of life before we lose life altogether. So, why don't we fast forward or mix it up or just completely change that typical pathway and really enrich our lives now? Find who we are, what we've lost, or what we can gain right now. So, as we dig into these different types of identities, I want you to keep an open mind. You can be here in two ways. If you're part of the LGBT plus community, this will kind of help you figure out where your spectrum is. Remember, it's ever flowing and it's ever evolving. But even if you're not in the LGBT community, the best thing you can do is try to understand the community better and become an ally. And the best way to do that is just to keep an open mind. The hardest thing when we're learning these types of things is that change, even though sometimes we want change in our lives, when it questions our norm or when it pushes against what we've been taught, sometimes it can be scary and sometimes we want to push it away because we either don't understand or it's so different or it's not fitting into our comfort zone. So as you're here, I want you to just take it with a grain of salt in a way. Just kind of hear all these different definitions and hear where you fall on the spectrum because it all interweaves no matter who you are, how you identify, and what community you happen to be in. And the best thing we can do for each other is to be open to the knowledge to embrace our differences. First off, let's just get really general. I'm just going to go through a couple different identities that might pop out to you and you might have heard before. And I will tell you, when I started to research and explore this topic, there are so many. Literally, the first thing I found was 64 different types. Now, I'm not going to sit here and read 64 different ones to you, but I did kind of narrow it down to the basic ones where from there it kind of branches off into different directions. So let's go through them together. First off, let's do a reminder again. What is gender? Gender is social and cultural. It's how your identity relates to society's idea of what it means to be a woman, a man, neither, or a mix of many genders. This may sound very strange because remember, gender has nothing to do with sex. For most people, their gender matches up with the cultural expectations of the sex they were assigned with at birth. Others may self-identify as being transgender, agender, two-spirit, queer, non-binary, gender fluid, any number of terms. So that's where we start to get this whole fluidity idea of what gender is. Remember, sex is biological. Gender is all of these different subsets of where we fall on the spectrum. Gender identity is your deeply held inner feelings of whether you're female or male, both, or neither. Your gender identity isn't really seen by others, but more of how you define yourself. Most of the time, we are taught that we need to identify either as a man or a woman, that it's only these two ways. And there's things that I'll take it back to childhood that boys like, and there's things that girls like. Now, I will say that the younger generation is grasping this concept a little better than even, say, me. I'm still learning all these different ways of thinking about who I am and I'm reevaluating who I am and how I identify. Now, in the past, I've told you I'm not the biggest fan of labels, but I am the biggest fan of finding your truth and being your authentic self. So, as we go through these things, remember gender is more of an expression. Gender expression is how you choose to express your gender identity through your name, your pronouns, your clothing, your hairstyle, your behavior, your voice, or your body features, which can all change depending on where you live, what culture you're in, and it's never the same. So we get stuck inside this bubble of thinking this is the way it has to be and this is the way it is throughout the world, but it's not. And that's when friction starts to divide us, because we want to put people in these boxes to make ourselves feel more comfortable instead of just allowing people to be who they are. When at the end of the day, it really doesn't affect you all that personally when these people are just choosing to do certain things and live their life in certain ways. Granted, there may be an action taken that may affect you, but most of the time, for example, myself, I would tend to be categorized as someone who dresses more masculine. Now, the clothes I decide to put on my body really don't affect anyone personally. And that's kind of what I want to express to people and explore with people, that when we have this friction, I want you to take a step back and ask yourself, how is this affecting your life? How is me being gay really affecting your life? Because me being gay and choosing to live the life I live and wear the clothes I have and cut my hair the way it is and make it purple, it really isn't personally affecting anybody until I take actions behind that, which really has nothing to do with me being gay, my hair being purple, or the clothes on my back. So that, again, is another concept maybe we'll start digging into later. So as we're doing all of this, it may seem like a lot. And I'm going to encourage you, especially this month, to go back, because I know for myself, when I got hit with this idea, which really isn't idea, it's actually scientifically proven that there is a difference between sex and gender. It kind of took me for a loop. It was really, really difficult to understand at first. And the reason that is because it was questioning my norm. I couldn't break what I had already been taught. And I became defensive because it became scary to think that what I was comfortable with and how I was already trying to find my self identity was then being questioned. So if you're going through this and all of this sounds really confusing, I just want to remind you that we're here together, we're figuring this out together, and to just be gentle with yourself throughout the process. It's going to take a while to really understand this concept and really feel good and authentic and how you're going to begin your journey or continue your journey on how you identify your gender identities. And again, what does it really mean to become an ally? You might also hear the word ally when people talk about sexual orientation. An ally is someone who advocates for the human rights of sexual and gender minority people by challenging discrimination. By doing that and standing side by side with someone who needs you now more than ever is so important. And you can stand even stronger by being here and understanding the community better and getting down to the commonality of we're all just working on ourselves and trying to be the best selves we can. So if you're not a part of the LGBT plus community, I thank you for being here and I thank you for being an ally. So we mentioned sexual orientation. I'm just going to start there so we can then dive into more gender identities, which branch off from all these things. Again, there's a lot, but I'm just going to talk about the basics today. So there is gay, when a man loves a man; lesbian, when a woman loves a woman. Bisexual, people who are bisexual are romantically and physically attracted to members of both sexes. There's asexual, so people who are asexual may not be interested in sex or intimacy, but they feel emotionally close to other people. And then there's heterosexual, straight. People who are heterosexual are romantically and physically attracted to members of the opposite sex. Now, those are just very basic ones. Now, from there, that's your sexual orientation. And then we start to dive into what your gender identity is. Now, these get confused. Sometimes we think that, oh, only people in the LGBT plus community have gender identities. Well, sorry to tell you, surprise, we all do. It doesn't matter how you identify as far as your sexual orientation. Identity is for everyone and is for all. Because again, it's more of an expression. It's something we've learned. It's something we've taken from our family, our friends, our culture, the town, the city, the things we've been taught in school. It's just this big jumble of things that make us who we are, which is awesome. It's when we start to break that down and judge other people that we cause this division and we start causing hate, which, in my own opinion, is very unnecessary. But the way to break that is to just understand it more. So how do we understand these gender continually evolving things? People tend to use the terms sex and gender interchangeably, but while connected, the two terms are not equivalent. And I know I sound like a broken record, but for my own personal benefit, I suppose, I needed to hear this over and over and over again in order to finally get it. Generally, we assign a newborn's sex as either male or female based on the genitals. Once a sex is assigned, we presume the child's gender. For some people, this is cause for little, if any, concern or further thought because the gender aligns with gender-related ideas and assumptions associated with that idea of what their sex is. Nevertheless, while gender may begin with the assignment of our sex, it doesn't end there. A person's gender is the complex interrelationship between the body, the identity, and the social gender. Most societies view the body as two fixed options, male or female, based on a person's reproductive anatomy and the biological functions. But a binary view of, so this two-sided view of sex fails to capture even the biological aspects of gender. While we're often taught that bodies have one or two forms of genitalia, which are classified as female or male, there are intersexual traits that demonstrate that sex exists across a continuum of possibilities. Now, this is all going to sound very strange and very weird to some, because it did to me, but hang with me. The relationship between a person's gender and their body goes beyond one's biological and reproductive function. There's been research in neurology and cellular biology to broaden the biological basis for an individual's experience of gender. In fact, research increasingly points to our brains as a playing key role in how we each experience gender. Bodies themselves are also gendered in the context of cultural expectation. A lot of us are stuck in this expectation of how we should look, including who we should be. Masculinity and femininity are the two, again, big binary ideas of how we should be, which should then attach to your sex. So again, boys should play with boy things. Girls should play with girl things. Did, done, no way, Jose. Life has too much and too many people and too much awesomeness to just allow ourselves to be fixed into these boxes. Now more than ever, who you are is so important. Your story is important. You are here for a reason, and we're here to explore how you can continue to present yourself and step out into the world and be your authentic, awesome you. Now let's look at identity. Gender identity is our internal, so what we feel on the inside, experience and the naming of our gender, how we're going to figure out who we really are. Surprisingly, understanding our gender, understanding those traits, and finding that identity comes to most of us at a fairly early age. Now, I found and I explored this research from the American Academy of Pediatrics. By age 4, most children have a stable sense of their gender identity. At age 4. Now, if you just wipe all this stuff away and all these weird terms and everything that might not be making sense, just look at a child. They like what they like. They play with what they want to play with. They're attracted to what they're genuinely attracted to. And they're friends with whoever they want to be friends with. And it isn't until we start to teach them otherwise that things go into question, which then causes us to question ourselves, which then causes us to not feel as much self-worth or confidence. And then again, like we mentioned last week, we go from this really authentic state at a young age to all this craziness to where we're being broken apart and judged and divided, to then when we get older, having to really revert back to who we were as a child and live more authentically. So I would like to continue to put out the knowledge to get rid of that middle step, to not have people feel as if they're not worth it, as if they need to be somebody else. And that's when we start diving into so much of what is happening is being taught. The words you might use to communicate your gender identity will change over time. Naming your gender is complicated and complex and an evolving matter, and that's okay. It becomes this evolving thing because sometimes we have the limited language or understanding of gender. So we sometimes need that time to discover what that really is and what that really means. I know it took me a really long time. And not really understanding why people were telling me I shouldn't do things and I shouldn't wear things and I shouldn't be who I was and I shouldn't like what I liked, even though there was no question in my mind. And it was something, so many of the things were so simple. It was just a shirt. It was just a toy. It was just a friend. But that's where it starts. And if you're here, young or old, we need to pay attention to that even more and realize that some of the things, even though with good intention, might be starting this foundation of making our youth feel less important and feel more confused. Because it's okay if a boy wants to wear makeup. It's okay if a girl wants to wear a bow tie. You might agree with me. You might not. And if you don't, again, I invite you to stay and keep figuring out why I, as a young girl, wanted to wear a bow tie. Well, it's because I liked it. If I go back to who I was as a child, it was literally as simple as that. I liked the bow tie. I liked the color, I liked the way it looked, I liked wearing a button-up, and I liked looking fancy. That's it. Nothing more. We tend to overcomplicate things. And the idea of gender identity, the idea of sexual orientation is complicated. but we're complicating it. So I want to continue to explore and continue to break these things down so we can find the simplicity in this idea of social gender. And that's the last thing we're going to talk about today. Social gender is this weird third dimension. It's this weird thing that our surroundings and our countries and our towns and our cities and our families and our friends have all created. This includes the expression of gender, which is the way we communicate our gender to others through such things, again, as clothing, hairstyles, and even your mannerisms, the way you hold yourself. It also includes how individuals, communities, and societies perceive, interact with, and try to shape us. They try to shape our gender. Social gender includes gender roles and expectations, and how society uses those to try to enforce conformity to current gender norms. Again, all of this is being taught. And when our LGBT plus youth start to feel that tension, it's because we're putting this heavy expectation on them, feeling like they have to fit in that box. They are beautiful in every way, in all ways, and the expression of who they are authentically is making this world a better place. Practically everything in our lives, whether we realize it or not, is assigned to gender. Toys, colors, clothes are obvious examples. Take a second. Think of a toy that you would consider being a boy toy or a masculine toy. Take a color that you would consider being a feminine color or a girl color. Or clothes. I've been taught these things as well, and I can name them really fast. Is it right? Probably not. But I had to unlearn that. What would be a boy toy? Maybe a Nerf gun or a G.I. Joe or a superhero toy. What about a color? A feminine color. Pink, yellow. What about clothes? Well, okay, cool. Suits, ties, bow ties are meant for boys. Dresses are meant for girls. I've broken all of those without even realizing it. It wasn't until I was told I was doing it wrong or that I shouldn't that I started to question who I was. We begin to teach children about gender from the moment they are born. We pick out boy things if we're going to have a boy. We pick out girl things if we're going to have a girl. Given this idea that's been passed on for a long time, it may take a long time to break it down. And it's way better than it was. And I'm hopeful that it will continue to trend in the direction of betterment. But it's the stereotypical definition of boy or girl that we have to break apart. Expectations regarding gender are communicated through every aspect of our lives, including family, culture, peers, school, community, media, and religion. Gender roles and expectations are so entrenched in our culture that it's difficult to imagine them any other way. So again, I want you to go way back because these norms around gender change across societies and they are changing over time. One only needs to consider men wearing dresses or earrings or wearing makeup or women having tattoos to see that flexibility and that change of social expectations of gender really being fluid. I found this really interesting concept of this notion that, like we said, pink is for girls and we think of a color and blue is for boys. This idea is actually relatively new. Prior to the mid-20th century, pink was associated with boys. Clothing and blue was with girls. Is your mind being blown? And this is what I'm saying. It changes all the time. We are constantly taught this. So let's break down the teachings and just find out who we are, no matter what your age is, no matter who you love. Let's find out who we are. Let's keep digging into this idea of identity and go back and start to break down the teachings that aren't doing us any good and get to the teachings that are opening the door to letting everyone express their best selves. And here's a reminder from genderspectrum.org where you can learn even more. There is a generational divide in how we think about gender. In order to bridge this gap, those of us who were raised with a more limited view of gender can take any opportunity to explore gender with new eyes, to read and ask questions to better understand gender's complexity. As with any learning experience, you'll learn more about the world around you and about yourself in the process. Gender diversity has existed throughout history and all of the world. As one of the most fundamental aspects of a person's identity, gender deeply influences every part of one's life. Where there is crucial aspect of self is narrowly defined and rigidly enforced, individuals who exist outside of the norms face immeasurable challenges. Even those who vary only slightly from norms can become targets of disapproval, discrimination, and even violence. This does not have to be the case. Through a thoughtful consideration of the uniqueness and the validity of every person's experience of self, we can develop greater acceptance for all. Not only will this create better inclusion for individuals who challenge the norm of genders, it will create space for all individuals to more fully explore and express who they are. So every day, keep diving into who you are, and most importantly, keep fighting the good fight.